they have a timeline, they have a process which they build up. And if we could intervene, wire up a circuit for that, and it goes from being a footpath to a bridleway, to a B road, to an A road, to an autobahn. So the real message here is, what are you using your mind for? Because what you use your mind for actually has predictive potency. And that's why things like gratitude, that's why things like compassion actually make a huge difference to people's health, because they start to wire up neural circuits. And those neural circuits also have an epigenetic effect. They start to change your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. They reduce your cortisol levels. They reduce stress levels. So this is what medicine looked at about 20 years ago, which is called the biopsychosocial model. I'm always slightly concerned about the psycho bit. It doesn't sound good, does it? But biopsychosocial medicine is connecting the biology and the physiology and the hormones and everything else that's happening to the psychological factors, but also to the social factors and the behavioral factors. And the more we can join up this stuff, because we are very intimately connected, mind and body. And when I went through medical school, people didn't talk about stress. Psychiatrists talked about neuroses, but they weren't remotely interested in them. They were interested in people who were seriously psychiatrically ill. But if you look at the majority of psychiatric illness or mental health problems, they have a genesis. They have a timeline. They have a process which they build up. And if we could intervene much earlier in people's lives, you could radically change the trajectory of a range of illnesses. And we know that because if you look at the work, Richard Layard and David Clark have written a great book called Thrive, but if you look at what cognitive behavioral therapy does for people with anxiety or with depression, it changes the neural circuits. You can see that on a brain scan. It's more effective than medication. And this stuff works. Why do we wait for people to get ill before we teach them the techniques? And what Seligman has looked at is that if you teach these techniques upstream, you can actually make a major impact on people's trajectory. This is protective. It's a cognitive behavioral vaccine. And it really does work. And that's very much the work we're doing. Actually, we're fortunate enough to be going into schools and universities now, because I think if youngsters can learn this earlier, you can make a significant impact. So why does this matter? Well, I think, interestingly, whether we talk about happiness or flourishing or life satisfaction, I think, as Mark said a moment ago, life sometimes actually throws you some real difficulties, and it can be difficult and gritty and painful and distressing, and we can suffer. And we all, I think, move along this continuum. So I think, if I suffer a bereavement of someone I really love, I might find myself with all the cognitive, affective, and behavioral symptoms consistent with a clinical depression, probably for some weeks, maybe for some months. And I think we need to normalize rather than categorize and label these things. Most of us are going to have patches of low mood. Most of us are going to have periods of anxiety, and Mark talking about, the current uncertainty in the markets and what's happening and people's job securities. This can move us along. And people who are stressed and anxious for long periods, it is depressogenic. You're much more likely to develop depression if you're stressed and anxious for long periods. So we should be teaching people not that you don't go here, because I think we all go here. The question is getting stuck. How do you get unstuck? Because it's a very sticky place, this. And it's sticky because it affects the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave. And it's very easy to get stuck. And I think what cognitive behavioral therapy and a range of other things do is help people come back from this space a bit quicker. And I think that's a life skill that should actually be in the part of the national curriculum, rather than actually waiting for people to develop problems and then saying, okay, well, we'll try and get you some treatment. We know that the CAM service for youngsters has got the most horrendous waiting lists. So I think there's something that we could be doing that would be important. The problem is that when we move along this dynamic, it affects your cognitive function. So your ability to think, your concentration, your memory, your decision-making is optimal here. Your brain's online. There's lots of data on this. Barbara Fredrickson's work in America. You actually feel good. You get energy. You get a spring in your step. You engage with people. You are pro-social. And you behave in a way that is actually, and we'll see this in a moment, you tend to be more benign. However, when we go over here, our thinking becomes what we call mood congruent. So when I'm sad, I have sad thoughts. But if I have sad thoughts, that makes me feel more sad, which makes me have more sad thoughts. And you can get stuck in that ruminative circuit. And actually, physically, we feel like a piece of chewed string. We don't feel like doing anything, and our energy is diminished, and we become avoidant and withdrawn. And when we become avoidant and withdrawn, that makes us feel more unhappy, and the whole thing can feed on itself. And it's looking at techniques for breaking those circuits and giving people tools and techniques that can help them recover quicker. I think there's a danger, though, in wanting to be flourishing or well all the time. And one of the things that Martin Seligman talks about is the tyranny of the positive. The danger is if you've got to be positive all the time, then when you don't feel so positive, you get upset about not feeling good, which makes you more upset because you actually get upset about being upset because you want to be good, but you're not good, so you actually get more upset. So I think we're going to touch on this concept of metacognition and meta-emotion. But I think it's about accepting that we move along this continuum, but what are the things that can help us recover a bit more quickly? Is there anyone here who's never felt stressed or anxious? Put your hand up if there is, because I'll get you to come and take over from me. Because I certainly have felt stressed and anxious. And I think it's normal. But I think just picking up on this concept is that actually having nothing to do is very bad for us. If you look at unemployment or people who don't have anything to do, it's actually not very good for us. What is good for us is being stretched. So this is like playing tennis against someone who doesn't hit the ball back. You don't actually play to your best. If you play against somebody who's slightly better than you, you hit your straps, you do really well. The danger is most of us are going to go here. Now, this is quite important because when you go over there and the oil light's flashing on the dashboard and you're getting cognitive symptoms, physical symptoms, and behavioral symptoms, how you respond to that is really important. And this is the metacognition and meta-emotion. And when I actually wrote my thesis on burnout in doctors, because doctors are particularly good at burning out, and there are various reasons for that, and it's often to do with not boundarying and caring too much and actually getting exhausted. And it's interesting, it's doctors who care who tend to burn out. It's nurses who care who tend to burn out. It's teachers who care who tend to burn out. If you don't give a shit, you don't tend to burn out. So the interesting thing is how people respond when they go over here. Because there's a group of people who do go here more readily, and they're perfectionists. And if you've got to be perfect, then actually the pressure you put on yourself can be so intense. And we're doing some work with Oxford and Cambridge at the moment. And they're getting a very high incidence of students actually, as are other universities, who actually are moving into this space